In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and white picket fences define the sense of order, life moved at a predictable pace. The residents prided themselves on maintaining their community's pristine appearance, governed by an overly strict homeowners association, HOA. Every house followed the same set of rules. No loud music after 10 p.m., no cars parked on the street overnight, and absolutely no deviation from approved paint colors or mailbox designs. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, but pretended they didn't. One sunny afternoon, a moving truck pulled up in front of 24 Birch Lane, breaking the monotony of the day. The neighbors peeked through their curtains, curious about who could be moving into the recently sold house. Out stepped Marcus Thompson, a tall, confident man with a warm smile and a determined stride. He wore casual clothes, rolled up his sleeves, and began directing the movers with ease. Marcus had just purchased the home outright, using inheritance money left to him by his beloved grandmother. For him, this wasn't just another property. It was a fresh start, a place to build memories and put down roots. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared his excitement. Across the street, Karen Wilson watched from her dining room window, sipping coffee as she observed the commotion. Karen fancied herself the unofficial watchdog of the HOA. She kept tabs on everyone, ensuring that nobody stepped out of line. To her, the HOA rules weren't mere guidelines. They were sacred commandments meant to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood. And something about Marcus made her uneasy. Karen couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt certain he didn't belong. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, calm and self-assured. Or perhaps it was the fact that he didn't seem intimidated by the weight of the HOA's expectations. Whatever it was, Karen decided right then and there that Marcus needed to be scrutinized. After all, she reasoned, it was her duty to protect the neighborhood from anyone who might disrupt its harmony. Later that evening, Karen strolled over to Marcus's house under the pretense of welcoming him. Holding a plate of cookies wrapped in cellophane, she knocked on the door with a forced smile. When Marcus answered, Karen launched into a rehearsed speech about how wonderful the neighborhood was and how important it was to follow the HOA rules. But beneath her friendly tone lay thinly veiled suspicion. "Oh, you must have rented the place," Karen said, glancing past Marcus into the half-unpacked living room. "I don't think I've seen you around before. Do you know the previous owners?" Marcus chuckled softly, sensing her unspoken assumptions. "Actually, I bought the house," he replied smoothly. "It's my first time owning a home here, so I'm looking forward to getting to know the area." Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Still, she pressed on, asking pointed questions about whether he planned to repaint the exterior or install new landscaping. Marcus answered politely but gave nothing away, leaving Karen more frustrated than satisfied. As she walked back to her house, cookie plate still in hand, Karen muttered to herself. Something about Marcus unsettled her, and she resolved to keep a close eye on him. Little did Karen know, her decision to target Marcus would lead to consequences far beyond what she could imagine. What started as harmless curiosity was about to spiral into a clash of egos and revelations that would shake the very foundation of their seemingly perfect neighborhood. The next morning, Karen couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off about Marcus. She replayed their brief conversation in her head, dissecting every word he'd said or hadn't said. His calm demeanor and vague answers only fueled her suspicions. "He's hiding something," she muttered to herself as she watered her meticulously trimmed rose bushes. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Karen decided to do some digging. First, she called the HOA office, pretending to inquire about general neighborhood updates. Casually, she slipped in a question about whether anyone new had purchased a property recently. The clerk confirmed that 24 Birch Lane had indeed been sold but didn't provide any details about the buyer. Frustrated by the lack of information, Karen hung up and turned to her next strategy: gossip. Over the course of the day, she casually mentioned Marcus to a few neighbors, fishing for tidbits. "Did you hear about the new guy on Birch Lane?" she asked one elderly woman during their daily walk. "He seems different." Different. That was Karen's polite way of implying that Marcus didn't fit her narrow definition of who belonged in their community. Unfortunately for her, none of the neighbors had much to share. Most hadn't even met him yet, and those who had found him pleasant and unassuming. But Karen wasn't deterred. If anything, their indifference only strengthened her resolve. She convinced herself that it was up to her, and her alone, to uncover the truth. As the days passed, Karen began noticing small, trivial things about Marcus's house that she deemed suspicious. For instance, his mailbox was painted a slightly darker shade of gray than the approved color listed in the HOA handbook. To Karen, this was proof positive that Marcus was flouting the rules. Then there was the matter of his car. It sat in the driveway overnight instead of being tucked away in the garage. And once, while peeking through her curtains, she swore she saw Marcus mowing his lawn at 7:30 am, a full 30 minutes before the HOA technically allowed outdoor noise. Each observation became ammunition in Karen's growing campaign against Marcus. She started documenting everything, taking photos of the mailbox, jotting down notes about his car, and even timing how early he used his lawnmower. Her notebook quickly filled with scribbles and arrows connecting various infractions. In her mind, these minor details painted a clear picture. Marcus was either ignorant of the rules or deliberately ignoring them. Either way, he was a problem that needed to be dealt with. But Karen didn't stop there. She also began spreading rumors among the neighbors, planting seeds of doubt about Marcus's presence in the community. At first, her comments were subtle, a raised eyebrow here, a hesitant pause there. But soon, they grew bolder. "I heard he might be renting," she told one neighbor over coffee. "And you know what renters are like. They don't care about keeping up appearances." Another time, she suggested that Marcus might not have paid for the house outright, insinuating financial instability. What Karen failed to realize was that her behavior was making her look increasingly unhinged. While she busied herself gathering evidence and stirring up drama, Marcus went about his life completely unfazed. He spent his evenings unpacking boxes, organizing his belongings, and occasionally sitting on his porch with a cup of tea. When he noticed Karen watching him from across the street, he simply waved, a gesture so friendly that it left her momentarily confused. Despite her efforts, Karen's attempts to expose Marcus only deepened her frustration. Every interaction with him revealed nothing incriminating, yet she refused to let go of her suspicions. Convincing herself that he must be hiding something big, Karen doubled down on her mission. Little did she know, her relentless pursuit of proof would lead her straight into a situation far more complicated and embarrassing than she could ever imagine. Karen's campaign against Marcus quickly escalated from casual observations to full-blown obsession. Armed with her notebook of evidence and a growing sense of self-righteousness, she decided it was time to take action. She began filing formal complaints with the HOA board, each one meticulously crafted to highlight what she perceived as Marcus's blatant disregard for the rules. The first complaint focused on the mailbox, the infamous shade of gray that dared to deviate from the approved color palette. The second cited noise violations, claiming Marcus had disturbed the peace by mowing his lawn too early. By the end of the week, she'd submitted 3 more complaints, alleging everything from improper parking to unkempt shrubbery. At first, the HOA board members were skeptical. They knew Karen's reputation for being overly zealous when it came to enforcing the rules, and they suspected her latest crusade might be another case of misplaced energy. But Karen wasn't about to back down. She showed up at the next HOA meeting armed with printed photos, handwritten notes, and even a color swatch to prove her point about the mailbox. Her presentation was so thorough and so passionate that it left some board members scratching their heads. Was Marcus really causing trouble, or was Karen blowing things out of proportion? While Karen worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the rest of the neighborhood started to take notice. Some residents sided with her, nodding along as she ranted about the importance of maintaining standards. Others, however, found her behavior increasingly bizarre. One neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, joked to his wife that Karen seemed to have nothing better to do than spy on people. Another, a young mother named Lisa, rolled her eyes when Karen knocked on her door to warn her about Marcus's supposed bad influence. Marcus, meanwhile, remained unfazed. He noticed the whispers and sideways glances, but chose not to engage. Instead, he continued going about his life with quiet confidence, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with neighbors who crossed his path. When someone asked him about the mailbox, he laughed it off, saying, "If that's the biggest problem around here, we're doing pretty well." His calm demeanor only infuriated Karen further. How could he act so nonchalant when she was working so hard to expose him? Determined to turn public opinion against Marcus, Karen took her campaign to the next level. She started organizing informal gatherings, inviting select neighbors over for coffee, and casually steering the conversation toward Marcus. "It's just strange, isn't it?" she'd say, sipping her latte. "He won't talk about where he works or how he afforded the house. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" To her dismay, these conversations often fizzled out. Many neighbors shrugged off her concerns, pointing out that Marcus seemed like a nice enough guy who kept to himself. Frustrated but undeterred, Karen resorted to spreading rumors online. She joined a private Facebook group for the neighborhood and posted cryptic comments about newcomers not respecting the community's values. Though she never mentioned Marcus by name, it was clear who she was referring to. A few people chimed in to agree with her, but most ignored the posts, dismissing them as typical Karen drama. What Karen didn't realize was that her antics were starting to backfire. While she saw herself as the hero of the story, a protector of the neighborhood's integrity, others began viewing her as petty and obsessive. Even some of her closest allies started distancing themselves, tired of her constant negativity. Meanwhile, Marcus's reputation only grew stronger. Neighbors who interacted with him described him as kind, respectful, and refreshingly normal. It became harder and harder for Karen to rally support for her cause. Still, Karen refused to give up. Convinced that Marcus was hiding something big, she doubled down on her efforts. She drafted yet another complaint to the HOA board, this time demanding proof of residency. Surely, if Marcus couldn't provide documentation showing he belonged in the neighborhood, they'd have no choice but to evict him. As far as Karen was concerned, justice was within reach. All she needed was one final push to bring Marcus down. What Karen didn't know was that her relentless pursuit of evidence would lead her straight into a confrontation unlike any she'd imagined. And when the truth finally came to light, it wouldn't just change the dynamics of the neighborhood. It would force Karen to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. The tension between Karen and Marcus reached its peak one crisp Saturday morning. Armed with her notebook, a clipboard, and an air of authority, Karen marched up to Marcus's front door. She had spent days rehearsing what she would say, determined to catch him off guard and force him to reveal the truth, or at least confirm her suspicions. As she rang the doorbell, she straightened her posture, clutching her clipboard like a shield. When Marcus opened the door, he greeted her with his usual calm smile. "Karen," he said warmly, "what brings you here today?" Karen cleared her throat, trying to sound official. "Good morning, Marcus. I've been noticing some discrepancies lately, and I think it's important we address them, for the sake of the neighborhood, of course." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but gestured for her to come inside. "Of course. Please, have a seat." He led her into the living room, where sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the neatly arranged furniture. "Can I get you something to drink? Tea, maybe?" For a moment, Karen faltered. His politeness threw her off balance. This wasn't how confrontations were supposed to go. He was supposed to be defensive, nervous, maybe even angry. Instead, he was offering her tea as if they were old friends catching up. Shaking off her hesitation, she sat down stiffly on the edge of the couch. "No, thank you. I'm fine." "All right then," Marcus said, taking the seat across from her. "What can I help you with?" Karen flipped open her notebook dramatically, as though preparing to present a case in court. Well, Marcus, there are a few things I need clarification on. First, there's the matter of your mailbox. It's not painted the correct shade of gray according to HOA guidelines. Then there's the issue of noise. Mowing your lawn before 8 a.m. is strictly prohibited. And finally, she paused for effect, looking him directly in the eye. I need proof that you actually live here. Are you renting this property, or did you purchase it? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with amusement. Proof of residency, huh? That's an interesting request. Well, Karen pressed, leaning forward eagerly. Are you going to show me, or do I need to escalate this to the HOA board? Instead of answering immediately, Marcus stood up and walked over to a desk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a folder and returned to his seat, placing it on the coffee table between them. Before we dive into that, let me ask you something, Karen. Why does it matter so much to you? Do you make it a habit to interrogate all your neighbors, or am I special? Karen bristled at his tone, which was light but carried an undercurrent of challenge. This isn't personal, Marcus. I'm just trying to ensure everyone follows the rules. We have standards to uphold. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then opened the folder. Inside were documents, official papers stamped with seals and signatures. Here's my deed to the house, he said, sliding one paper toward her. And here's the title insurance policy. As you can see, I purchased this property outright. No mortgage, no rent agreement. Just me. Karen scanned the documents, her face turning pale. They looked legitimate, but she refused to believe it. That doesn't prove anything, she muttered. Anyone can forge paperwork these days. Marcus chuckled softly, clearly enjoying himself. Fair enough. But wait, there's more. He pulled out another stack of papers. These are records showing that I own several other properties in this neighborhood, including yours. Karen froze, her mouth dropping open. What are you talking about? It's true, Marcus continued, flipping through the documents. You're currently paying your mortgage to me. Well, technically, to the company I set up to manage my real estate investments. But yes, I'm your lender. For a long moment, Karen sat in stunned silence. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. There was no way this could be real. It had to be some kind of trick. Yet the papers in front of her seemed genuine, and Marcus's confident demeanor left little room for doubt. Finally, she stammered, "You're lying. You must be. Someone like you couldn't possibly." "Someone like me?" Marcus interrupted gently, his expression softening. "What exactly does that mean, Karen?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her clipboard and stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "This isn't over," she snapped, backing toward the door. "I'll verify everything myself." As she stormed out, Marcus called after her, "Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help." Once outside, Karen leaned against her car, heart pounding. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and none of it made sense. How could she have misjudged Marcus so completely? And worse, what did this mean for her, and for the neighborhood? The neighborhood buzzed with anticipation the following week as word spread about an emergency HOA meeting. Karen had called it, determined to expose Marcus and clear her name after their awkward confrontation. She spent hours preparing her case, gathering every document she could find to prove that Marcus was either lying or hiding something. But deep down, doubt gnawed at her. The memory of those official-looking papers and Marcus's calm confidence kept replaying in her mind. Still, she refused to back down. If anything, she doubled down on her resolve, convinced that there had to be a flaw in his story. On the evening of the meeting, the community center was packed. Neighbors who rarely attended HOA meetings now filled the rows of folding chairs, curious about the drama unfolding between Karen and Marcus. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about what might happen next. Others sat quietly, observing the tension like spectators at a tennis match. At the front of the room, The HOA board members shuffled papers nervously, sensing that this would not be a typical discussion about mailbox colors or lawn maintenance. Karen stood near the podium, clutching her folder of evidence like a lifeline. When the meeting began, she wasted no time taking the floor. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm enough to command attention. "As many of you know, we've recently welcomed a new resident to our community, Marcus Thompson. While I appreciate new faces, it's important that everyone adheres to our rules and standards. Unfortunately, Mr. Thompson has raised several red flags." She launched into a detailed presentation, listing every alleged infraction Marcus had committed: the mailbox color, the early morning lawn mowing, and even vague claims of suspicious behavior. Her tone grew increasingly dramatic as she reached the climax of her speech. "But most concerning of all," she declared, pointing a finger toward Marcus, who sat calmly in the back of the room, "is the fact that he cannot provide credible proof of residency. He claims to own multiple properties here, including my own home, but I believe these claims are false." The room erupted into murmurs. Some neighbors exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued by Karen's bold accusations. Just as the noise began to die down, Marcus stood up. With a polite nod to the board members, he walked to the front of the room and took the podium. The atmosphere shifted instantly. His presence commanded respect, and the chatter faded into silence. "Good evening, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady and warm. "First, let me say how much I appreciate being part of this community. Moving here has been a wonderful experience so far, aside from some misunderstandings." He glanced briefly at Karen, who crossed her arms defiantly. "Ms. Wilson has raised some valid concerns about transparency, and I'm happy to address them fully." Reaching into his briefcase, Marcus pulled out a stack of documents bound neatly in a folder. One by one, he laid them on the table in front of him. The deed to his house, mortgage agreements for other properties, and financial records proving his ownership stake in the development. "As you can see," he explained, "I purchased 24 Birch Lane outright. Additionally, I own several homes in this neighborhood, including the property currently occupied by Ms. Wilson." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even those who had sided with Karen looked stunned. For her part, Karen stared at the documents, her face pale and expressionless. Marcus continued, his tone measured but firm. "I understand that change can be unsettling, especially when assumptions are challenged. But I hope we can move forward together in good faith, focusing on building a stronger, more inclusive community." When he finished speaking, the room remained silent for a beat before erupting into applause. Neighbors turned to each other, whispering excitedly about Marcus's revelation. Karen, however, stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. All eyes were on her now, waiting for a response. Summoning what little composure she had left, Karen stammered, This changes nothing. Rules are rules, and they apply to everyone equally." But her words fell flat, drowned out by the growing admiration for Marcus. As the meeting adjourned, it was clear that the neighborhood dynamic had shifted forever, and Karen's authority had crumbled under the weight of her own misguided crusade. In the days following the explosive HOA meeting, the neighborhood was abuzz with gossip and whispered conversations. Karen's dramatic downfall had become the talk of Birch Lane, and her once unquestioned authority was now a source of ridicule. Neighbors who had previously tiptoed around her out of fear or politeness now avoided her altogether, embarrassed by their association with her behavior. Even those who had quietly supported her campaign against Marcus began to distance themselves, realizing how misguided and petty it all seemed in hindsight. For Karen, the fallout was unbearable. She felt like she was living in a nightmare where everyone judged her, mocked her, or worse, ignored her completely. Her daily walks around the block, which used to be a chance to assert her dominance and enforce HOA rules, became exercises in humiliation. Every friendly wave from a neighbor felt laced with pity, every sidelong glance a silent critique of her actions. The worst part was seeing Marcus go about his life as if nothing had happened. He greeted people warmly, hosted small gatherings on his porch, and even offered to help a new family move into the house across the street. To Karen, it felt like he was deliberately rubbing salt in her wounds. But Marcus wasn't done yet. While he hadn't retaliated against Karen during the meeting, he decided that some changes were necessary to prevent similar situations in the future. Using his influence as a property owner, he proposed updates to the HOA guidelines, emphasizing fairness, inclusivity, and practicality over rigid enforcement of trivial rules. Gone were the nitpicky regulations about mailbox colors and lawn lengths. Instead, Marcus suggested focusing on initiatives that would strengthen community bonds, like organizing seasonal festivals, setting up a neighborhood watch program, and creating a fund to assist residents facing financial hardship. The HOA board eagerly embraced these ideas, partly because they made sense, and partly because no one wanted to cross Marcus after his public vindication. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to transform. Residents started working together more openly, sharing resources and collaborating on projects. A few families even formed a gardening club, turning unused patches of land into vibrant flower beds and vegetable gardens. For the first time in years, the community felt less like a sterile subdivision, governed by fear, and more like an actual neighborhood filled with real connections. Meanwhile, Karen's life spiraled further downward. Not only had she lost her credibility, but she also discovered another unpleasant truth. Her mortgage payments were due for renewal soon, and Marcus held the reins. When she tried to contact his management company to renegotiate terms, she learned that Marcus had decided not to extend her loan agreement beyond its current term. Without refinancing options readily available, Karen faced the daunting prospect of either selling her home or finding a way to pay off the balance in full, a task that seemed impossible given her modest income. Desperate and humiliated, Karen began lashing out at anyone who dared approach her. She accused neighbors of betraying her, called Marcus a snake in disguise, and ranted about how the world was unfair. But her tantrums only pushed people further away. One evening, as she sat alone in her kitchen staring at unpaid bills, reality hit her hard. Everything she had worked so hard to protect, the pristine image of the neighborhood, her position of power, her carefully curated reputation, was crumbling before her eyes. And there was no one to blame but herself. Realizing she had nowhere else to turn, Karen swallowed her pride and decided to confront Marcus again. This time, however, her tone was different. Instead of accusations and demands, she showed up at his door with tears in her eyes, pleading for mercy. "I know I messed up," she admitted haltingly. "I let my assumptions get the best of me, and I treated you horribly. Please, give me another chance." Marcus listened patiently, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "Karen, I'm not going to punish you for what happened. We all make mistakes. But actions have consequences, and yours have put you in a tough spot. You have two choices: sell your house back to me, or work with me to improve the neighborhood and rebuild trust. It's up to you." Though far from forgiving, Karen knew she had no other option but to accept his terms. As she walked away from his porch that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long road toward redemption or ruin. Karen's decision to cooperate with Marcus marked a turning point, though not necessarily an easy one. At first, she struggled to adjust to her new reality. Gone were the days when she could strut around the neighborhood as its self-appointed guardian, barking orders and enforcing rules. Now she found herself tiptoeing around, hyper-aware of how others perceived her. Every interaction felt like walking on eggshells, and every attempt at small talk came off as forced or awkward. It was clear that rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, and Karen wasn't sure she had the patience for it. Marcus, however, proved to be surprisingly fair-minded. Instead of holding a grudge, he gave Karen opportunities to contribute meaningfully to the community. When the HOA board announced plans for a neighborhood cleanup day, Marcus encouraged Karen to take charge of organizing volunteers. Though hesitant at first, Karen threw herself into the task, creating schedules, assigning roles, and even bringing homemade lemonade to share with participants. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of purpose, not because she was policing people, but because she was helping them. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had once dismissed her as overbearing began to see glimpses of a different side of Karen, one that cared about the community in genuine, if clumsy, ways. During the cleanup event, Lisa, the young mother who had previously rolled her eyes at Karen's antics, complimented her organizational skills. "You really pulled this together," Lisa said with a smile. "Thanks for making it happen." Karen blushed, caught off guard by the unexpected praise. "It's nothing," she mumbled, but the comment lingered in her mind long after the event ended. For the first time, she realized that being part of a community meant more than just enforcing rules. It meant fostering connections and working together toward common goals. Still, old habits die hard. There were moments when Karen slipped back into her controlling ways, micromanaging minor details or insisting on strict adherence to plans. Each time, Marcus gently reminded her to focus on collaboration rather than control. "We're all here to help," he told her once during a planning session for a summer picnic. "Let's make sure everyone feels included, not obligated." His words struck a chord, forcing Karen to reflect on why she had always felt the need to dominate in the first place. As weeks turned into months, Karen began to change, not dramatically, but noticeably. She started attending gatherings she would have once avoided, engaging in conversations instead of interrogations. She joined the gardening club, surprising everyone, including herself, by discovering a knack for growing tomatoes. Slowly, she earned back bits of respect, not through force or manipulation, but through effort and humility. Yet, redemption came with its own challenges. Financially, Karen remained under pressure. With her mortgage agreement set to expire soon, she faced the looming decision of whether to sell her house or find another solution. The thought of leaving the neighborhood terrified her. It was the only home she'd ever known. But staying required sacrifices she wasn't sure she could make. One evening, while sitting on her porch watching the sunset, Karen reflected on how far she'd come, and how much farther she still had to go. She knew she couldn't undo the damage she'd caused, but she also understood that change was possible. Marcus had given her a second chance, and though she doubted she'd ever fully regain everyone's trust, she vowed to keep trying. After all, the neighborhood wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a tapestry of lives intertwined. And for the first time, Karen wanted to be part of the pattern, not the stain. Little did she know, her journey toward redemption would inspire others to reconsider their own assumptions and biases, setting the stage for a deeper transformation within the community. Over time, the neighborhood began to feel like a different place. The changes Marcus had introduced weren't just superficial, they were transformative, touching every aspect of life on Birch Lane. What had once been a community defined by rigid rules and unspoken divisions became a space where people genuinely connected. Block parties replaced formal complaints, shared vegetable gardens sprouted in empty lots, and neighbors who had barely known each other's names now exchanged warm greetings and home-baked cookies. It wasn't perfect. No community ever is. But it was better. And Karen, despite her rocky start, played a small but meaningful role in this shift. Karen's transformation didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't easy. There were days when old habits crept back, moments when she caught herself judging someone or wanting to impose order on situations that didn't need it. But unlike before, she learned to pause, take a breath, and ask herself, is this about helping or is it about control? More often than not, the answer guided her toward humility rather than authority. Over time, her presence in the neighborhood stopped being the source of tension and started becoming something else entirely. A reminder that growth is possible, even for those who seem set in their ways. Marcus, too, continued to lead by example. He didn't lord his ownership over anyone. Instead, he used his position to empower others. When a young couple struggled to afford repairs after a storm damaged their roof, Marcus quietly arranged for contractors to help at a reduced cost. When an elderly neighbor needed assistance navigating paperwork for property taxes, Marcus stepped in without fanfare. His actions inspired others to pay it forward, creating a ripple effect of kindness that spread throughout the community. As for Karen, she made the difficult decision to sell her house, not out of defeat, but as a step toward embracing a new chapter in her life. To her surprise, Marcus offered her a fair price, ensuring she wouldn't face financial hardship during the transition. "You've worked hard to rebuild trust," he told her when they finalized the sale. "I hope this gives you a fresh start." Karen moved to a smaller apartment in a nearby town, leaving behind the neighborhood she had once tried so desperately to control. Though bittersweet, the move felt liberating. For years, she had clung to the idea that perfection, whether in appearances, behavior, or rules, was the key to happiness. Now she understood that true fulfillment came from connection, vulnerability, and letting go of the need to always be right. Back on Birch Lane, life went on. The annual summer picnic became a beloved tradition, drawing families together for laughter and shared meals. Lissa organized a book club that met monthly, while Mr. Peterson taught kids how to fish at the local pond. Even Marcus found joy in hosting barbecues on his porch, where stories flowed as freely as lemonade. The neighborhood had become more than just a collection of homes. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of second chances and open hearts. Looking back, no one could pinpoint exactly when things changed. Was it Marcus's leadership, Karen's redemption arc, or simply the cumulative effect of countless small acts of kindness? Perhaps it was all of these things. And more. What mattered most was the result. A community united not by fear or obligation, but by mutual respect and understanding. And though Karen's name eventually faded from daily conversations, her story lingered as a quiet lesson. People remembered her not as the woman who tried to evict Marcus, but as someone who stumbled, fell, and ultimately chose to rise again. In doing so, she reminded everyone, including herself, that change is never easy, but it's always worth it. Birch Lane wasn't perfect, but it was real, and sometimes that was enough.